Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear League Project, how the heck are you? Thank you very much for being with us this edition. Super excited out here in the Rocky Mountains. A lot of fun. We've got John Hogue with us, and we're going to talk about, actually, John came up with this one. What comes after a toast with a Corona beer? Pandemic prophecies, Dr. Nostradamus himself, the John Hogue, world-renowned scholar and political renegade. Mr. John Hogue shares his thoughts on After a Toast with the Corona beer. We're going to look at pandemic prophecies, what we can expect. Let's talk about it. And before we do, I just wanted to give a real quick shout out to my friends over at virtualshield.com/leak project. That's virtualshield.com/leak project. Ladies and gentlemen, with everyone working at home, it is critical to have a VPN. What's a VPN? That's a virtual private network. You want to make sure you have one that's safe, secure. What it does, ladies and gentlemen, is it keeps your information anonymous. So when you're looking stuff up on the web, it also gives you an open canvas. So it's not specific towards a geographical location. If you want to find out what's going on somewhere else, it's not going to be showing you searches based upon your previous searches. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's also safe, secure, super easy to do. You just push a button, and it'll say on, activated. For example, when I use it oftentimes, it'll show I'm in Dallas, Texas, when I'm really out here in Southern Colorado. They're going to give you a 30-day free trial, 30 days free, and after that, it's only $2.50 a month. You can even have an option to turn off your microphone and your webcam if you're concerned about that. I know a lot of people will have tape over their webcams. So, John, man, let's get into this. What do you see going on? Thank you for being a guest on the program. It's good to see you.
Well, my goodness. I mean, everybody on the show tonight is going to get a preview of what my subscribers are going to see in the next day and a half. That would have been up tonight, except that I had an interesting adventure where at the break of dawn in Pacific Standard Time yesterday, I was going to be on what was called the Channel 1 Russia's Oprah Winfrey show across the entire 16 time zones of Russia. I've kind of become a thing of interest in Russia because of the Edgar Casey prophecies that I've done there, talking about this whole issue of whether Russia is somehow a hope of the world or not, which Edgar Casey saw in 1944 in the middle of World War II. And he said it would be when Russia is no longer communist, that the Russia that would follow, and that's like 40 years later, would be different. And because it straddles the East and West, it would have this unique geographical political position to be an arbiter and a crisis manager rather than a certain country that is making a very large business out of perpetuating war to keep a war market going. And because that same market often gives advertisements for weapons and super planes and stuff on all of our network news to people who could never afford such weapons, and guys with men in black sunglasses and black and white shadows, kind of with a straight jawed Aryan look of here we are, Raytheon, and I used to think, what are they doing with this? This acts to me like a dog who is trying to, in a certain way, claim territory and ownership of the media. And so, and if they're groom manning or Ray Theoning these things on certain networks, they are controlling the editorial situation. That is what this dog of war, let slip the dogs of war, said Shakespeare, cry havoc and let slip them, is what they're doing to our main source until recently of the news. And so this situation is happening now, and there are also very interesting situations that are going on. I mean, there's so many things I wanted to say on this Russian show, but when I linked up at the break of dawn here in Pacific Standard Time to this major show, I was told by my media agent that it was the Oprah Winfrey of Russia. But when I got to see what the feed on Skype was showing me was basically um, um, who was the guy in Ohio that did the encounter shows? Rex, you know? Yeah.
I don't
Anyway,
know.
well, yeah, it was a guy that it wasn't Oprah. It was like a huge encounter show. You know, the guy that used to have people get up and fight on the stage.
Jerry
And
Springer.
Jerry Springer, yes.
Oh
So it
man.
was the Jerry Springer Russian show with a lot of people screaming, yelling in Russian.
But John,
And
real quick, let me
right.
interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but I got to interrupt. Which is
No.
worse?
Actually, Jerry was better because it was eloquent. I had this poor translator who was trying to talk over the screaming Russians, who was mumbling in the side of my ear. Well, he's saying this and then so there I was waiting for them after a sound check for 3 hours, and then finally when it was ready to go on, they show my screen of what's going on in the show, and of course myself off camera like you see me here, and they were all arguing. It's called Let Me Talk, which is kind of a dangerous title for a show, because what that says without saying it is everybody's shouting at each other and everybody's going, let me talk, let me talk. So I'm diving into this thing. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, they're all saying, we don't want to hear this guy talk about Nostradamus, and we don't want to hear this American guy going out off about Baba Vanga's possible prediction about expressing her interest in Corona beers as a prophecy of the crud. And so I'm thinking, oh God, this might as well be a witch burning crowd. And so I'm bolstering, I'm girding my loins, and I hear the guy saying, okay, ready, Mr. Hogue, in 2 seconds, 3, 2, 1, and then the plug was pulled. So I didn't get on the show. And so the beauty of it is that now I can do the show to people who really give a damn about what I say, because in such a show like that, nobody is it's all about shouting and yelling and ego and who puts on a better show. And then, you know, in this time when things need unusual insights to help at least give people an alternative view that can help them in this evolutionary crisis time that we're in, where people need to, as Billy Bean in Moneyball said, adapt or die. Adapt or die, or be a dapper guy when you die. But anyway, the thing is, so now I'm going to talk to you about the things that this show that could have been seen by 100 million Russians didn't happen, but you're going to get it. And the insight is the big question: did Nostradamus, the famous plague doctor who single-handedly cured, or fought at least, the plague in 3 cities when the bubonic plague reemerged in the 1540s. This is about 10 years or more before he wrote his famous prophecies. So he actually see the coronavirus? Because you would think the theme of plagues would be very big on his plate. And it would also have a bit of PTSD in it too, because he had some pretty horrific stories to tell about what he did with the plague. Before I get into those prophecies, I always planned to write a little book about Nostradamus's pandemic predictions. And this now, with this time, with everybody sequestered, especially since I'm in one of the places first in a shutdown situation, the Pacific Northwest. I also have a view for all of you in other places that are fresh with this, of how this thing might plane out, if you will, and then descend as far as people drinking too much Corona beer, if you catch my crud hint. And again, yeah, and again, as many of you have commented who have seen my previous shows of late, welcome to our new abnormal, where certain situations require that I deliver my work in a similar coded way that 4.6 centuries ago Nostradamus had to do.
It adds to the cool factor and the timeless factor.
It does. And what's also remarkable is in Nostradamus's comments about fighting the plague. He was living in Aix-en-Provence. He was living in Marseille, the port city of Marseille at the time, in 1545, 46, when there was a huge flood in the winter of that time, that the Rhone River overblown its banks. It broke through levees that had been holding the river in since ancient Roman times. And when the spring came, so came the bubonic plague, which was the same plague that in the 1300s killed half of Europe's population. And I will just touch upon that when it did that, with anything like a great disaster like this, a national and international disaster, back then, what had happened is the feudal system, which had a handful of people with all the wealth and the mercenaries to protect it behind castle walls, around the castles had all the people called serfs, the same word that gave the term Slav, which means slave. And it was a feudal system with two classes, the very rich and the very poor. But when the bubonic plague came and carried off half of the European population, when life got back to normal, as we all hope in our situation will happen soon, suddenly the serfs, because there were less of them, had more value. And so they petitioned their rulers that you cannot treat us like you had before, because now we have the power of the fact that we've been decimated and you need our labor. And thus began the first implantation of what we know today as middle classes. And it came in that time. And I'm alluding to this interesting situation because one thing you learn in the field of prophecy is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Case in point, Nostradamus is summoned to the capital of Provence in South France, where he lived. He was born there. And in the neighboring city of Aix-en-Provence, which was the capital. And he took his mule and his pack animals with his equipment and things to be summoned to this outbreak of the bubonic plague that was overtaking the city, but none of the villages around it. So when he was given access into the gates of Aix-en-Provence, the guards were almost acting like, we're giving you entry to the gates of hell. And when he went in, and what he found with the city fathers was a town in a state of hysteria caused by people dropping dead in mid-statement or running amok or having what are called on their necks and behind their ears and on their legs and limbs, le charbon, which is his term for the carbons. And these are the black pustules on the lymphatic system that people, at least 400 years earlier in the great outbreak all over the world of the bubonic plague. The bubo was these black pustules that emerged from your lymph glands and caused you to die. And the situation that made that so dreadful was that this thing, which was actually a vector or carried by rats, fleas, that because of unhygienic actions in life, people living amongst their livestock, kind of the 16th century version of a wet market, were they didn't know, nobody knew about germs until 1889, when Louis Pasteur discovered them and pasteurization. And guess who actually foresaw 10 years later that he would do that? Nostradamus. And the question I've always asked is, did he know about that? When did he know this happened? What I can see from his accounts of the plague is he had not yet known what was the cause of disease. But 10 years later, in Century 1, first volume of his prophecies, Les Prophéties, the prophecies of Nostradamus, his magnum opus, History of the Future, he talked about the thing, the secret, long ago forgotten, shall be rediscovered by Pasteur. He will be considered a demi-homme, a demigod for this. This will take place at the end of a grand lunar cycle. However, by rumors as foul as farting, he shall be dishonored. Now, when I looked at this prophecy, because I have spent 40 years at this, I am, unfortunately, the last scholar of Nostradamus that I can discover with influence on the media all over the world that has actually done the homework to have some authority about what I'm saying. There, you go on internet now, you go anywhere, the tens of thousands of websites about Nostradamus, you have any idiot saying, oh, he means this, oh, he means that. And you can tell in my situation from one who knows that these people can't even read 16th century French and never even tried. They just go and pick up whatever's on the internet, badly translated, and translate it worse. In fact, they even change it so it looks original, making it worse. And so in my book, Nostradamus and the Notre Dame fire, I really made a real expose of that happening because of that fire that happened last year on, just 2 days ago was the anniversary of it. On April 15th last year is when the cathedral burned. And all of these great internet experts absolutely missed what was the prophecies Nostradamus saw. And a little later, I'm going to get into the prophecies of the coronavirus, the corona beer.
Yeah, the hangovers.
Phi Beta Kappa, Phi Beta Kappa. So, it happens. I'm certainly appreciating what a great effort Nostradamus had to make to clothe the truth in a way that would not harm the vulnerable sensitivities of those, some of them in influential places, who would hope the future would fit their sensibilities, but it does not. And so, and at the same time, one is careful in this balancing act not to reveal too much openly so that such people of influence make the future worse. That is the conundrum of Nostradamus's prophecies. So, he
Good
felt
point, John.
responsible. He felt responsible for what he was saying. And for years, he struggled with shall I do this? Shall I write this history of the future? And he thought of the harm it might do, not just only to his immediate family and his children. He had lost his first wife and 2 children to malaria in Agen in 1538. He thought it was a plague of humors coming out of the marshlands, and so he was not able to deal with it in the usual way, and he lost his family. And when that happened, it was scandalous. The city of Agen thought that he was playing with the devil, and they summoned the church justices to summon him to a dungeon in Toulouse, neighboring Toulouse. And when all that happened, and when he fought to keep his wife's dowry, he lost the court case. So one night he packed up his mule and disappeared for 6 years, wandering Europe. Some of these apocryphal stories come up of him as he's grieving, as he has been shattered by this experience in his early 30s. It often happens in the life of great seers that their world is destroyed, and they either are consumed by that or they rebirth their destiny. This happened to Nostradamus. He went back to being a wandering apothecary, a druggist, and physician. And in this process, there are stories that appear. There's 2 stories I want to share with you guys that I haven't shared before for a while on Medium. One of them happened a little later when he was in Italy. He was quite often in Italy during the peak of the Renaissance period to gather information. And he went to Florence and Rome often to gather information and the tools to do what was his other passion. That was to have the occult ability to see the future. His day job was being a pharmacist and a doctor. And also a protobotanist. That's why he went to Agen, because a man named Scaliger was there, who was the kind of the father of botany, one of the early pioneers of it. It had not been turned into a science. So Nostradamus had a passion to identify and categorize plants, which he used in a pun in his book that actually describes his travels around Spain, the Kingdom of France, Lorraine, and down into Italy as the Traités des Fardaments et Confitures. And it's a treatise on pharmacists, which he lists in this account. And he also in it talks a lot about his other passion, preserving fruits and keeping food from going bad, and his love of cosmetic alchemy. He actually became a cosmetic manufacturer when he eventually settled in Salon in the 1550s and was semi-retired from being a physician at that time. But before all that happened were the dark days of his plague work, which happened when he resurfaced in the history books after 6 years in 1545 in Marseille. By the way, I don't agree with him, but he hated Marseille. I think Marseille is wonderful, being in France, but the reasons why, I don't know. It was his different situation, but here's the point. Why was he there if he hated it so much? Marseille is the doorway to all the books available from the Mediterranean world. And he was there, living probably near its many bookstalls, trying to find the knowledge, the occult knowledge, to do what he really wanted to do, predict a history of the future. That actually spans up to, in his final dated prophecy, of 3797 AD, which is nearly 1800 years from now. So before I get into all the shocking stuff I'm going to talk about, we survived it, at least up to the year 3797 AD. And the indications are that that is simply when he could no longer date by astrology incidences happening on this earth, because his prophecies indicate we're no longer on earth after that date. We are elsewhere in space, in the Aquarian constellation, and for time forever, perpetual time, in worlds around the constellation of Cancer. So, but before all that happened, there was this bereaved man. He was in Lorraine, and we have this story. It could be apocryphal, but it's a wonderful story. I've rarely ever told it. It's the famous story of the black and white pig. He was the guest of a man in a chateau, a princely man who was a skeptic of his prophetic abilities, or a cynic, more like. Most people who use the term skeptic are misusing it. It means to investigate without front-loaded bias. But in this day and age, it's considered, I have a front-loaded bias against it. It's completely wrong. And you've got people like Penn and Teller and James Randi, who like to boast that they are skeptics in their entire career of mentalism and flim-flam, that don't even know what the word means. So thus is the tricky people of flim-flam. So anyway, they were going to have a dinner that night. So the host said, I hear you have powers of prophecy, and we are standing here before the pen where there are pigs for our dinner tonight. Which pig will we eat tonight? Nostradamus said, the black pig, between the white and the black. So as he went on, the master of the house told the kitchen head, slaughter the white pig and put it on and prepare it for us so I can trick this foolish man. So the dinner happens. They're all eating this sumptuous pig. And the master of the house said, Monsieur Notre Dame, I have you caught. You said that we'd be eating the black pig. We are not eating the black pig. As delicious as it is the white pig. So much for your prophecies. Nostradamus said, no, it is the black pig. Summon your cook. So the master of the house said, okay, I'll summon. He summons the cook. The cook is very sheepish. He says, well, out with it. Is this the white pig? I ordered you to cook the white pig. What happened? And the cook was saying, well, master, please don't beat me, but I did kill and slaughter the white pig and prepare it for dinner tonight. And then I went on to do some errands. And then your bodyguard's wolf cubs, when I came back to the table, were eating the white pig. They had broke into the kitchen and were eating it. So to save your face, I went back and slaughtered the black pig, and actually we are eating the black pig. So, wonderful story.
It is a wonderful story. The only problem is now I know what people are going to say in the comment section. There's going to be two trolls. There's going to be two trolls in there that are going to go, that's wavy.
Yes, and then maybe we will have a story where Nostradamus ate the white troll rather than the black troll.
Thank you. So, well, it's an even. I was hoping he was going to say, let's just eat them both at the same time. That way we won't have any controversy.
There you go. I love controversy.
That's a good story. No, that's a great story, though. And I'm just goofing around because
yeah, I know, and
I can appreciate that.
And to be fair to the trollish at heart, it could be an apocryphal story. In my biographical examinations, I look at the sources. It could be true, Um, but we're going to talk about things beyond that may or may not happen, like this next story I'm going to tell you about Nostradamus's journeys when he was kind of fragmentarily recorded in those 6 years of grieving and transformation after the loss of his first family in Agen. But soon I'm going to talk about things that he made very clear were his prophecies. And why? Because one of the things that's going around all over the world when this all started with the Corona beer issue is a prophecy about 2020, and that there'd be a crown and all of this. And it's a pathetic fake prophecy attributed to him. And the reason why, and Nostradamus saw this stuff coming because he made sure that, except for his prose prophecies, all the prophecies we know him best for, his 4-line quatrain verses, are all indexed. So if you see anything in the internet that does not have the correct indexes, which would be a C1Q25, like I was talking about this famous prophecy, which I'll get back to about Pasteur. If that's not there, or CQ25, if there's nothing like that, if it's a made-up number, a verse from 1552, which is where this current fake was broadcast all over the world like a virus, the person was clever enough to know that the prose prophecies of Nostradamus that are missing, some of the rare things, because he was a best-selling author, enjoying the first fruits of the last great information age 500 years ago with the printing press. And he's having a renaissance, excuse the pun, in our current information age. But the same plague, cancerous problem that bedeviled him then is happening now, where people attribute to him things he never said. And when he was alive, when that happened, there were situations where he was arrested for creating a statement under his name, a book under his name that looked at some Protestant extremists who were threatening the Catholic majority. And when he was visiting Marseille in 1561-62, during the first of 9 religious civil wars that he foresaw, the reason why he wrote his History of the Future, to stop them, he was arrested for a book he never wrote that had his name on it. And he was in a dungeon for a couple, and he was old then, and he was in a dungeon, and he had to be released by his friends in politics and other places that knew that he was a credible, devout Catholic. So that kind of skullduggery is still happening today. And he even admitted that because he was using codes and nebulous language and prophecy, he did it for a point of protecting the future from people who might change it and people who might propagate from it. So he did a balance of things. He had the tricks of having identity serial numbers, and if they're not there, then you know it's a fraud. At the same time, he also predicted how he'd be used as propaganda weapons in future wars. And that comes up in a real situation that he foresaw about a certain Swiss Nazi German man named Karl Ernst Kraft, who before the war, or early part of the war, was working for the Gestapo, who, by the way, was a very gifted interpreter and scholar of Nostradamus. But his political affiliations were quite spurious. But he was trying, using his true gifts of understanding in astrology, judicial astrology that Nostradamus used, he saw how Adolf Hitler would be killed in a Munich beer hall during the annual time where he used to celebrate the Munich Putsch that happened, where he tried to take over Bavaria and failed and went to prison. So it turns out that he saw it, he wrote his comments down, date tagged it, and locked it away in the Gestapo files. A shrewd thing to do because he knew it was coming next. When it actually happened on 9th November, he was arrested because of the law that said you can't write any prophecies, fortune telling about the Fuhrer. So he directed the Gestapo people to this file. They unlocked it, opened it up, and read what he date tagged. And it was so impressive that the propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, heard about it. And you can read his 6 entries in his diaries where he talks about using Nostradamus as a weapon to during the war to upset the hysterical nature of French and English people who are very easily victimized by forecasters and soothsayers. So he then embarked with a bank of people run by Karl Ernst Kraft to write pamphlets that were quite powerful, because unlike the Allies who would later do this on Winston Churchill's coin during the Battle of Britain, these Nazi Nostradamians were really quite good at it. And they, in fact, were freaking out because this man that kept coming up in the prophecies named Hister, with the Gothic S that has a T-like look about it, so it looks like Hitter, the second Antichrist of Nostradamus, which for the Nazis would not be a problem because they would say, yeah, we are Antichrist. We want to abolish the Christian religion. So they didn't see that as a bad thing. So they and Karl Ernst Kraft tried to find anything that would indicate that Hister, who's mentioned 5 times in the prophecies as the captain of Greater Germany, who holds as his symbol a Hakenkreuz, a crooked cross, would win this war. But instead, he was finding that he would be beset at all sides by great armies crossing the rivers. Hister would be isolated into his fortress. And in other words, his Festung Europa, which is what he called his defense of the Reich when he was losing the war. The Fortress Europe, Festung Europa. And in Nostradamus' prophecies, he kept talking about how history would be thrown into an iron cage underground where he would die and nobody would know what happened, whatever came of him. Now, I wondered, what does that mean? One has to constantly strip away the ways in which one will think, according to one's time, what the past is trying to tell us. And what Nostradamus, in the way back in the past, is trying to tell us about our future. If he's telling us something, he will tell it according to his filter of his programming as a 16th century man. One of the things that must happen if you ever embark on this fascinating detective work looking at the prophecies of Nostradamus is you must know everything Nostradamus knew. And fortunately for you, this 16th century character, most of everything he wrote has survived. So you can read it all, which means you have to be able to read 16th century languages. And then you have to understand the 16th century mindset. And if you do, then these prophecies begin to deliver easily their secrets. But if you don't, then you will fall under the victimhood of that has happened to every well-meaning scholar in 4.6 centuries who continually try to make Nostradamus fit their time's biases, not his. So, What then happens is that you start looking at these things and you have to think out of the box. You can't, one of the things that people always do is they're looking for a completed structure. So they're looking for a cage and they won't find it unless you happen to do what I did and stumble upon a photograph of the Führer bunker in Berlin in the middle of its construction. It was a vast 2-story rebarred cage. And then it dawned on me, Nostradamus, under my assumptions being a movie programmed person, did not see this cage when it was finished. He saw it when it was in construction. Just like the Kennedy prophecies about the great brothers. The one that is in around noontime, like a thunderbolt shot down by a man in the misty copse, a kind of scrub brush wood. What does that mean? Well, in the 1980s, there was an amazing documentary which inspired the work of Oliver Stone in JFK, a remarkable movie. A movie that was an epiphany for me dealing with prophecy, because Oliver Stone merged fact with myth.
That was a good movie. I remember seeing that as a kid, and it was over the top. It was very good.
It was a work of genius. It was out of the box. It upset everybody on every side. And that's actually when I went to see it, because
Except for us.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
like, yes.
yeah. Well, yeah, indeed. Because whenever everybody left, right, and center hates something, I gotta see it, because then it's really challenging everybody's mindsets. And Oliver Stone definitely does that with his movies. And in this one, he did it. He taught me. I could not have finished and written my protean book, The Millennium Book of Prophecy, that was published in 1994, and other things I've done since. If I could meet him, I would tell him this, that he helped me understand that there is a place of meeting between fact and investigative reporting and myth that is a higher truth. And it ultimately inspired me to write the first full biography of Nostradamus, understanding halfway through the process in 2001. That I always wondered, why is it that there's so many figures in the 16th century who don't have all the surviving data to write a 450-page book document, biography, classic biography? And why has this never been done until the early 21st century? Me. And then so I went into it, and in the middle of the writing, I discovered why. You cannot separate Nostradamus from his myth. And if you understand this powerful word of myth, it is a full spectrum rainbow of all meanings. Myth is one of the most amazing words, because it not only includes it's BS, it's fake, it's flim flam, but myth also has in its higher meanings, it is a truth that transcends fact. It's perennial to the moment. It is why myth is a more powerful teacher about J.R.R. Tolkien's trauma at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, which was the cradle, the thorny cradle of all of his great myths. He wasn't an allegorist. He was literally trying to use myth to help you and us feel what it was like to be in his Mordor, the trenches of the Western Front. And with all the history I've learned about the First World War, I have had such epiphanies watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and also reading him, J.R.R. Tolkien, but actually watching it dramatized. And I've literally had the epiphany of, now I understand what World War I was, because of all, and this is germane to what we're dealing with now. World War I was the loss of innocence. It was the loss of a stable way of living. And when that war happened, it killed the past of chivalry and glory of war and all that, and brought people with their pretty uniforms into modern warfare, which is a meat grinder, inhuman, a destroyer of nations. And because of that, psychically, World War I, even though the worst World War II came 20 years later, a completing unfinished business, really. World War I has a special place in the world of military trauma for its psychic trauma to a world that never seen such a conflict, where people's lives were destroyed with not even any glory, not even any accomplishment of victory. It was just fronts that were in stasis because the weapons had become far more destructive than the tactics of the armies that used them. And so, just a little allusion to our current beer crisis, Corona beer crisis. We are all right now getting a taste of that shock and awe of a comatose, shut down world that has put all of our lives on hold, just like World War I did. And in some ways, this first shock of many shocks that are coming in the 2020s, as I've been writing for 32 years, warning people about this decade. The interesting thing is that by the time 20 years later that World War II happened, people were actually more adapted to the upheaval to deal with it than they were in World War I. And the good side of that is that this little rehearsal of what's coming all through the 2020s and 2030s is actually a blessing in disguise, that the first year of this 2020s, we are having a rehearsal of things that I've been saying on your show and other shows, that you go to sleep one night and you wake up in the morning and the whole world has changed and you're in a new normal. And you're not coming back to the last normal. And so it will kick in to all of us, just like World War I did, and what came after in the 20s and the 30s. It's the only parallel I can give, only this is much bigger and more widely global. Is we will also adapt, like our grandparents and great-grandparents did before, to the evolutionary crisis we have entered. And the good thing is, and since your watchers on this show are, because of I do a lot of online readings with them, display an engagement, a thinking out of the box, which I must say of your community. There are not a lot of communities that I deal with in the media that have this quality as yours does, Rex. And so
they're awesome, right?
They are, and they're all over the world. And this
maybe even
technology,
off-world.
And so no one wants to go through what we're going through, but this community that you have, beyond the trolls that are just always there, that's okay. I mean, if there weren't the contrast of trolls, we wouldn't appreciate those who are listening. So trolls, I love trolls. They have their cosmic role to play.
Hey, look, I love them too.
Yeah.
Just not quite as much.
That's honest. And they've earned that. So
they have.
Yeah. And they've worked very hard to earn that.
They've worked hard, and so we'll
Very
give them some
hard,
love.
dedicated.
Yeah, they've put that work into it. So we give you some love, just not
We
as much.
give you some love, and you've earned exactly the consequences of what you send.
You're lucky you're getting any love. My goodness.
Yeah.
If anything,
So,
Anyway,
yeah.
no.
Yeah.
We love you,
Anyway,
trolls.
we love you, trolls. And I mean, some of my favorite scenes in Lord of the Rings were when they were fighting trolls. So,
You've got to have them, right? That's a good point. There's
yeah.
The opposite, the duality. You've got the trolls, the wizards, the goblins, the elves, the
You
dragons.
can't have life without parasites sucking it. You can't have the beauty of a free fish without a lamprey biting into it. It's part of this bigger picture, which is transmoral. And I deal a lot with this in the situation of prophecy. I have to look at it beyond good and evil and see the bigger picture. That's why I don't hate anyone. I can hate what people are doing, but I cannot hate anyone. It's so many people now hate Mr. T in the other wash than the one I live in. And because of that, they're blind to the full spectrum of this uniquely complicated man who is a man of a catalyst and a man of destiny, for better and worse. And I've been pretty accurate with him because I don't have a charge, a blind belief in him or a blind debunk. I just see him and his potentials. And that's how I see the future. I've learned that by studying Nostradamus's work. Now, I want to come back to something I left hanging, of the number of things I left hanging in my freewheeling narrative spontaneity.
Do you want to jump on that on part 2, or do you want to do it now?
I'll do it now.
Okay, cool. Okay, great.
How much time do we have left?
Let's wrap this up in about 10 minutes, and let's go for part 2.
Yeah, no, I think it's nice to talk about this remarkable prophecy that goes back to the time of when Nostradamus was fighting the plague and in Aix-en-Provence. First, I'll go into a little bit in this 10 minutes about what he did. He comes through the gate where I left him last. And he writes about how a lot of things that sound like what we're dealing with today. And by the way, his main form of fighting the plague was social distancing. And it's a funny thing about, and I'm talking about all of his comments are going to be in my newest book, number 50. That'll be out next month, which is called Nostradamus, the Coronavirus and the Pandemic Prophecies. And it looks at all of his 53 to 55 verses of prophecies about plagues past, present, and future beyond the corona. And but I first wanted to introduce him as the plague doctor, for if he had not written a single verse of prophecy that created the controversy that has continued to keep him being one of the argued about figures of history, not dead and buried in a book, was if he had never written these prophecies, his account of his fight in 270 days, almost single-handed, fighting the bubonic plague in the city of Aix-en-Provence, is considered one of the great examples of classical French literature from the 16th century, where he is, and so he ended up doing a situation where first thing he did, he had the sitting magistrates and all public coming together. Nobody comes in crowds, just like now. People who are showing signs of having the pestilence are sequestered in their houses. He would then talk to them and give them things through his window, but he would not go clearer than 5 paces from people, because he said, if you walk within 5 paces of these people, you will have it. You will get the evil humors. The they use metaphors in medieval and Renaissance time, and you'll see many woodcuts of this where demons are shooting arrows and wielding swords. They're invisible to the people they're striking down. That's an important metaphor for us to look in the second hour when I talk in detail about the prophecies of diseases that are happening today. And these metaphors is how you uncover his 16th century clues to things by knowing how he thought and wrote poetry. So,
John, I got to say something real quick because you
go ahead.
just connected some dots for me that was quite powerful. Ancestors, the ancients, and prophecies and scriptures talking about demons and evil ones and these wicked spirits and such. What if they were viruses, man? Some of them, not all of them, but what if some of what they're like, hello?
Yeah. Hello. I mean, that is, you know, what is evil but something that people can't explain? So they feel disempowered, and the disempowerment of their lives upsets the equilibrium of their automatonic lives. And then there comes the next swindlers, the people in dressed like priests and politicians who give them simplistic slogans and conclusions, or blame a certain group of people for being the cause, whether it's China or Jews in Nostradamus's time, for things that are sickening the world. And that's playing again. I mean, the mistakes that happen in China, that it's looking more and more was bad hygiene protocol that might have released a one too many drinks of the corona.
That's not what the new narrative is, though. The new narrative is really pushing the other, which is interesting because it's like they're looking to me. Now this is just, I'll just give a quick 2 cents on it. So it started off where the mainstream news came out with both options, but stuck mainly with the wet markets. Like, is that what it's called?
Exactly.
Okay. And then they left that in the media as a possibility that it wasn't from that it was made in essence. So they left that, but then some alternative media picked up on it, and the mainstream went to the alternative media or some of the alternative media managers and said, no, you're conspiracy, blah, 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 blah. And now the table is turned again, and the mainstream is saying that it might be made. So it's like they have to control the narrative.
Yeah, and this again is the demonic quality of when an unknown happens, people try to make sense of it to control their fear. The reality I will forecast is that what has happened, it's the unlucky misfortune of biolabs in China, that their iniquities of bad security, which happens in ours and in Europe's. The Skripal case is a classic example of that.
All over the world, security breaches happen.
Yeah. And the unlucky ones, and it was warned, and actually in this case, the mainstream actually picked up in the alternative media those real journalistic sources that are still checking their facts. And even when I was in Coast to Coast, I said, I'm leaning towards a mistake in protocols that released this, that then infected a bat and then got into the wet market. It is actually a mix of the two situations. It got released because the protocols back as far as 2015, when people came to research what was going on there, they had documented a great concern that that protocols to keep experimental studies in their labs and not on their person accidentally were quite wide open. So it, of course, would then the reaction of politicians anywhere on the planet before they can either get a good lie to cover a situation or fess up to the reality, was to suppress the information. And Mr. T is right this time about the who are definitely in Beijing's pocket, not delivering the information, and thus far, this many thousands of people died because of this attempt to control an uncontrolled mess up, which could have happened here. But the unlucky draw was there. And now people who are xenophobic, who need to find a common enemy to distract people from the real problems, which we'll talk about more in the second hour, that are an economic pestilence that is much bigger than this issue of a few too many Corona beers, is now with us, and we'll talk about in the second hour. But back to Nostradamus's most famous medical prophecy, where he gave us a vision that I don't think he believed when he was fighting the plague. I mean, he did a lot of the things that people did then. He might have even worn the bird beak mask and the leather armor and all of that people did. Doctors, everybody kind of understood they were on the right track about plagues, even all the way back to biblical times. In the book of Samuel, you will find them talking about bubonic plagues, and that there was a host of rats that would always be around when they surfaced. And their idea was, well, rats are filthy and ugly, and so we'll kill them all in our cities. And then they noticed that when these demon agents of plague were killed, the plague disappeared, not understanding that the rats were actually vectors of the fleas of the bubonic plague. And so they did the same thing, and Nostradamus used hygiene to clean the city, get the sick out into places outside of the walls, to sequester those who could not leave, to end all social gatherings, and to clean fortunately, because Aix is famous even to this day for its springs of fresh water and its hot volcanic baths. He used that water to purify the city. He cleaned things up. And it's not an innovative thing. The myth is that Nostradamus was a clean freak, and that was surprising for the 16th century. What I discovered was that all Nostradamus was doing, in a classic Renaissance way, is bringing back the virtues of the better times, as they saw it, of classical Rome and Greece, where they were more enlightened than the current time. And the Renaissance, the resurgence, the rebirth was of classical wisdom and science. And so all things classical were loved, including classical metaphors, which is what Nostradamus uses a lot to hide his clues. And most people don't know that because they haven't studied it. Now, so he was only doing what Hippocrates and Galen in Rome, the Greek father of medicine, and Galen had always said: clean clothes, fresh water, fresh bedding, not a lot of food when you're sick. Don't lock people away in stale, foul-humored areas. Open the windows, let the fresh air come in. Get rid of the dirty clothes. If you've got filthy vermin around, kill them. Make sure the animals are not living with the people. Get them separate. Stuff that. So, and in fact, there were even some doctors 100 BC who were theorizing in Roman texts that maybe there's some very infinitesimally small little creature, a germ, that was making disease. So
I want to take it a step further, because I've studied the ancient Sumerian stuff and also the Nag Hammadi scriptures and Babylonian stuff that was etched in stone, and they were working on genetics back then. There's one specific tablet called Enki and Ninmah, where Enki is taking a nap, and his mom's like, "Get up, the you got work to do. Gods want you to make some people. They're tired of doing all this work." So Enki and Ninmah, which is Ninmah is basically like his wife or his counterpart, they start drinking beers. They start, taking shots. And guess what they're doing? They're taking shots, getting drunk, and making people. They're like, yeah, we made this one. This one doesn't stand upright. We'll give him to the king. Yeah, that one's not a guy or a girl. We'll give that one to the king too. No, I'm not exaggerating. You read
No, I know. It's the tale. I concur.
So there's a multitude of these texts. They're 7,000 years old. So you brought up something that's real powerful. Renaissance, the resurgence of knowledge. And during the 1500s and 1600s, that's what was going on, right? They were tapping into these older sciences and teachings that were connected to the stars and astronomy and the Romans and the Greeks and pre-Babylon, etc., the Egyptians, India, for example. My goodness, the Vedas go back thousands of years. So we are reconnecting again. And that's one of the things that is timeless, that is, in my opinion, so powerful with astronomy, is the stars are always on time.
That's right. And in fact, some of the star constellations and configurations that are in the Rig Veda indicate a confluence of conjunctions of planets and stars that hasn't happened in 70,000 years.
Bazinga.
Yeah. And so yes, there is a whole other subject, the breaking down of the religious like dogmas that keep archaeology stuck at civilization starting around 5,000 years BC, when in fact there are grids off the coast of Ahmedabad that indicate it was 10,000 BC. So, but that's a whole other story.
You and I are going to have a future podcast talking about Vedas and ancient Indian stuff, because you know that stuff, and we've never done a podcast on it.
Yes. In fact,
I can't believe that.
My disciple name from my teacher Osho
is
one of the great characters of the Mahabharata.
See?
Arjuna. That is my spiritual name.
That's cool.
He is the king who fought in the great Mahabharata with his archery, with Lord Krishna as his charioteer.
Rolls Royce. That's why he had all those Rolls Royces, isn't it?
There you go. Chariots. No, actually, those Rolls Royces, which we painted up and made great, those Rolls Royces ended up in the Reagan years being our collateral to build the city.
Cool.
And we owned them. We let Osho drive them. He was just our guest. We had to build a city around him because so many thousands of people from all over the world wanted to be with him. So that means we had to, and I did. I dug the plumbing. I built the bridges. I was a security guard. I was the ranch pest controller. And all of the rest of us were just, work became our meditation to allow the 5,000 residents, who I was one of, and the 20,000 more people that came in the summer festivals to be there, to be fed, clothed, and have a disco to go dance in and do stuff. So and celebrate life with our masters. So we'll get into Arjuna and all of that later. But here's the thing.
Interrupt.
Yeah, I was telling you about an hour ago I recited the famous prophecy of Quatrain 25, Century 1. Now I'm going to decipher it for you. The first line: the thing long ago forgotten shall be rediscovered by Pasteur. The first thing I see is, well, Pasteur, how many times has that been used by Nostradamus? So I have a database of every word that Nostradamus used in his prophecies, and all of its modern, ancient, and Renaissance possibilities of about a half dozen languages, predominantly Latin and Latinized 16th century French, and Provençal, which was his dialect in South France, which is more Spanish Latinized French. For instance, in Provençal, you would say the city, you would say le cité. In French, he would have said le ciudad. If you look, there's a abea, a bee, he'd say abeos. And so I'm thinking, okay, there's only one other reference to pastor, shepherd, in the prophecies, and it's clearly about the shepherd of Rome. That's the Bishop of Rome. So that is a prophecy about the Pope. It has no correlation to what Century 1, Volume 1 of the 10 volumes, quatrain, verse 25 talked about. So what I kept in mind, is there anybody who has the name Pasteur that discovered something long ago forgotten? He said he'll be elevated to a demigod position when the current, in Nostradamus's time, lunar grand cycle comes to its completion. That started in, so you apply judicial astrology to find out that started in 1535 and was slated to end in the year 1889. So then the detective in me says, was there
Wasn't there a
somebody
great
named,
comet that year?
no, I know, not that year. You're thinking of Halley's more in the early 20th century. But no, there was no great comet. So, but there was a great discovery and a great thing that happened. And the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1889 wrote about Louis Pasteur, the man who created pasteurization. That's why your milk doesn't have bugs in it, because he discovered that germs created disease, which later led to the discovery of viruses, which is kind of a Twilight Zone creature that comes alive when relating to life. It's a ring wraith, basically, neither living nor dead, as Strider would say in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's a virus is a wraith in medicine. And so the thing is that so then what happened is that I found out that the encyclopedia gave Louis Pasteur the name demigod. And in the year 1889, Louis Pasteur created the Institute Pasteur, which is existing to this day, which looks and investigates germ technology to cure people. So suddenly, what looks, if you have the knowledge, you know what's hiding between a verbal dating of a grand lunar cycle. The name Pasteur is literally the mentioning Louis Pasteur. And since Nostradamus was a doctor, it has more credence. And he has seen the thing long ago forgotten. He may not know what it is, but he knows that Louis Pasteur will discover it. And then the final line, because it's all going great for Louis until the final line when he says, and then there will come a scandal, and he will be dishonored by rumors foul as farting. In the old French, the way he uses it, he's meaning it stinks like a fart, a brain fart or a real fart. So I looked at that, and then I didn't find until 1995 a correlation. There was a scholar who was given access to read all of Louis Pasteur's notes in all his work about pasteurization and germs and rabies, which he created the serum for that. And what it turned out is that not unlike what he officially said in his biography, that he tested it on animals before he tested it on street urchins, poor homeless children in the streets of Paris. This is very Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. The truth was that he just tested it on street urchins. He didn't test it on animals. He went directly to human children, which makes him a bit of a French Dr. Mengele, and that is his scandal. This prophecy is one of hundreds that, if you have the knowledge to uncover them, clearly proves that Nostradamus is onto something in these prophecies. And so the plague doctor foresaw the man who would, even if he didn't know what it was, he knew that that man in 1889 would find out what the mystery was of these desperate battles with the plague, which he bravely fought despite his ignorance and the ignorance of everybody around him, but his courage to deal with people. And basically how he thought he fixed it was with rose pill lozenges, a breath freshener. Basically, in the work and in my next wave of articles, you'll actually see the recipes that he used, which he wrote down to create a lozenge that you put under your tongue. And he said, for those who are surrounded by the perfumes of this pungent cypress rose petal thing that he had, they rarely had the plague. That's probably accidental to the fact that they were also told to stay away and be clean and be away from other people. And it's also possible that the plague was defeated when winter came, and rats and people both don't like to associate. They want to get into a warm place and hang through it. So, but that doesn't, his ignorance does not deny his courage. But the thing that haunted him, and I'll end on this before we go into the next hour, and he wrote about the thing that haunted him as a post-traumatic stress disorder was the day that he came to check on one of his patients and was speaking to her through a window. Her and her sister were sick with the bubonic plague. He went 3 days later to see them, and he saw that this other sister was already dead and sewed into a death shroud. And the second younger sister was talking to him while she was dying, trying to sew up her own death shroud, because she said, and he was saying, why are you doing this? He says, no one else will do it for me. She got halfway before she died. And it really traumatized him. You know, he was a compassionate man. And that's why I think his, which we'll talk about in the next hour, his prophecies about the future plagues of humanity, of which this one that we're in, he does talk about. In a strange way, he is blending it possibly with another event of disease that is in our future. He's seeing them as the same, but they're actually two different things. He often does that with events. It's like he's seeing a number of events as one, and he couldn't see that they were actually in time different things. We will talk more about that in the next hour.
Wow, John. All right. Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, go to HogueProphecy.com. That's HogueProphecy.com. John also does astrological reports specifically for people based upon their birth date, their birth location, etc. If you'd like a reading with John, if you'd like to have a personal connection with John, make sure to send him an email. Go to HogueProphecy.com. Click the contact button, and then that way you can get in connection with them. Also, check out leakproject.com. I was looking at how many pages of content we have out there. So I've got over 3,000 podcasts at leakproject.com, over 211 pages worth of podcasts. So we're going to do a update on the website that'll show a section for the exclusive content. We do have a section now that does show exclusive content, but it doesn't show the hundreds of podcasts that are exclusive in that section. So you kind of have to dig through it a little bit. It's a wonderful website. It's just, I do want to update it for people and make it easier. We've got a forums section at Leak Project. So that's really neat. If you like to blog and post information and you leave links to news, etc., that you think is important. So that's totally free. I really want to have people go there and build up information and knowledge for the world. So folks, check that out. It's forums.leakproject.com. I'll leave a link in the video description for that as well. If you do want access to the premium content, you can become a premium member. We have $10 a month options or $50 for the whole year. And we even have a Patreon page. And if there's a podcast that you really want to listen to and it's exclusive and you just can't afford it, hey, send me an email. I'll take care of you. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. We'll see you again in a few minutes. Be excellent to each other. Hit
just
the bell.
One more thing. Yeah, just one
John's
more
got
thing.
One more thing. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Don't worry about it, man.
Just want to be clear that when you go to HogueProphecy.com, you can contact me on the contact button, but you will also see in the default page right in front of you in the opening an email, HogueBulletin at hogueprophecy.com. And if you click on that and put Hogue reading in the subject line, I will get back to you and talk to you. And I would also say, if you, I'm already seeing a surge as things improve and people come out of sequestering. A lot of you are wanting to know what's coming next in your personal lives. So I suggest that if for May, and I have the times up, that they're going to go really fast. So if you really need to get some help and some insight of the potentials that are coming after this sequestering, please contact me at hogueprophecy.com.
Excellent. All right, John, I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much. Everybody, you're amazing. Be the change you want to see. I don't even think I'm going to edit this. I'm just going to upload it the way that it is.